Welcome to the Coffee House Writers Group podcast. If you have not seen us before, go ahead and check out our archive, or growing archive. Will grow into a sizable archive. This is episode 6, where we talk to Wendy Van Camp, and stick around because it's a great conversation. Thank you for joining us wherever you may be. In a couple minutes, we're going to be talking to Wendy Van Camp, who has done the Writer Shop Talk for Coffee House Writers Group about the author platform, which is going to be very important because many agents and publishers will not take an author if you do not have some sort of platform. And by platform, we mean some sort of audience who is receiving information about you, are interested in you, and are potential customers to buy your content. But it's not just about the publisher, it's about having that audience in the first place, because one option you may want to consider is being self-published, which Wendy Van Camp is. And her platform, it comes from social media, comes from mainly her website, nowastedink.com. And it's a lot of work. Work for an author is not just the writing aspect, as much as we would all love it to be just put down the words and forget about them and that's it. Because books are a business, and if you want to live as an author, you need to sell your books. And today we'll be talking to her about how to do that, what she's done, some of the things that work, and why she does what she does. And she also has more than that to tell, many fun stories and history in this industry. Because most of us, when we do make it, so to speak, some people may seem to have it overnight, and some actually do, but for the vast majority of us, we have been sharpening our tools, our mental pencils, if you will, refining our craft more and more, and you have to really prepare. Luck is in part preparation for opportunities, for success and opportunities. Because if you get some sort of offer or someone is interested in what you're writing and you don't have it finished or it's not polished or refined, then it doesn't serve you any good. Getting those chances, making network connections, they don't really count for anything if you don't have something good to present. But on multiple levels, it also takes a lot of work to build up that network. If you have something really great to present and no one to talk to about it, then you have only one ski that you're writing on instead of a pair of skis. And that's one of the reasons why we have critique groups, is to improve both ourselves as writers and the work. Most of us have heard that in order to be really great at something, you have to invest 10,000 hours into it. And if you have just the basic requirement of talent or foresight or whatever concoction makes a writer brilliant, if you put in the work, then that will be paid back. The work is not just the platform and the writing. The work is also knowing what your audience wants. Because if you're writing something that's really, really good, but nobody wants to read it, then you're out of luck. There's so many different levels, so many things that we have to think about at a time. So just sit down, make a plan. Prepare, I'm going to write this, and then I'm going to write this. I'm going to make blog posts on this day and this day. I'm going to talk about this. This is how I'm moving forward in my career. I have a goal. Is this thing that I'm doing now pushing me towards that goal? And by the way, about Coffee House Writers Group, we are taking Wendy Van Camp's advice about posting at a regular basis, consistent, and we are slowing our workload down. This podcast will be coming out once a month, at least. You may get a supplemental episode every once in a while. It will be on Thursdays, but we haven't nailed down exactly what time. The description will have more information and any sort of updates that we don't have time to do in the audio version. So now let's go into the fun conversation with Wendy Van Camp. So you said you used to work in the industry?
Well, yes, I did. A long time ago. I started out as just like an intern at the cable station in Long Beach, Comcast. boy, I was actually hired there for my very first job. And that's where I got my directing experience, actually. It's kind of a funny story, if you don't mind hearing it.
Of course.
The first time I directed was when I had been an intern maybe, 6 to 8 months. And I was working on a talk show, and it was the most boring talk show in the universe. It was, our sole subject was a history professor from Cal State Long Beach. I believe his name was Art Levine? Maybe. It's been a long time. But, and sorry, Art, if you're listening, I don't mean to call you boring. But,
it was the program.
Well, it was, basically, we locked down the cameras. We had one person to do all 3 cameras, and it was a live-to-tape show, or rather a live show. And we had one floor manager. Then we had our director and producer, same person. And then we had one person to assist him in the control room. And that person would be the TD, or technical director. And that was me. I'd worked my way up from just doing the camera to being floor director. And finally, they let me into the control room to learn there. So I would learn to use the Chiron, which was what we'd used way back in the day to do titles. It was a big, expensive machine, too. And then eventually he says, well, let's make you TD. And the TD is the person that actually throws the switches when the director gives the commands to switch the cameras. And of course, like I said, it was live television, so anything I did went live out to our vast audience of maybe a few hundred people. I don't know.
Okay, so not that much pressure.
Well, no, it was live. It was serious. I mean, this program was being paid for by the client, and you have to take the
Who would the client be?
I think it was Art Levine, the host. Well, he would have guests in occasionally too, and if you're into history, it was probably more interesting. But back then, I was in my, early 20s. I was, what can I say? But anyway, one day we were recording the program. We were maybe halfway through. And suddenly we're Mike, the director, and I were sitting in the control room, and he kind of sniffs. And he goes, do you smell smoke? And I went, I think I do. And he goes, oh my God, we're alone in the building because we do the show late at night, like 9 o'clock at night. And he goes, I got to check this out. I'm responsible. And he gets up out of his chair and he goes, Wendy, take over. And he runs out of the control room. Well, I'm sitting here and I'm going, oh my God, we're live on television. What the heck do I do? And then I'm just sitting there and I know what to do because I've been the TD for quite some time. But I suddenly hear from my floor manager, cue, camera, what? So I started to slowly give out the commands, do my usual routine. And I'm sure to the viewers there was absolutely no way to tell that something had happened or transpired. I was very smooth. But after...
As you would like it.
Yes, but the segment's maybe 7 minutes long, so it felt like an hour to me. But it was only 7 minutes. And but toward the end, I realized, oh my God, I have to throw to our PSA reel, which is our commercial break. Well, the tape that does the commercials was on the other side of the control room. There was no way physically for me to go over there, cue up the tapes, hit the button, and go to black. And I'm just sitting here going, oh my God, what am I going to do? We're like 30 seconds in, whatever, what am I going to do? And suddenly behind me, I hear a voice, your tape is queued up, waiting for your cue, Wendy. And it was the director. He had snuck back in, I guess, to watch me from behind, but I was so intense on what I was doing, I had no idea he'd come back. So I gave the commands and told them to turn on the PS at the proper time and did my switches or whatever, and we faded to black, and everything was just perfect. And the director comes up, and he puts a hand on my shoulder, and he goes, you know what, you didn't do half bad. Maybe next week we should just have you come in and direct a segment. And I went, wow. Well, and of course, the other producer heard how well I did as an intern, and he says, Wendy, you ought to come and direct one of my shows, too. And, of course, all the other interns were livid. Oh, how dare I get this wonderful whatever. And then, of course, later they hired me, too. That was my first job in the industry. So it kind of went on from there. I mean, I didn't obviously become a director overnight. It was a process of many years. But eventually, I think my last steady job was with Mattel, directing toy commercials with little kids. It was a lot of fun. Did that for a couple of years. But I haven't really been a director... I'd say in at least 10 years. let's just say, as a woman, I wanted children, so I took some time off, and I never had the children. It just didn't work out for my husband and I. But by the time I was ready to maybe get back in the saddle, let's just say I've been away long enough, I doubt anyone's going to pull the director's chair out for me again. But, meanwhile, I've become an author. I've been an artisan jeweler. And I'm kind of content with my life the way it is. And so it doesn't bother me so much. But I do have all these little directing stories, you might say,
yes,
under my belt.
I saw that. You've written some creative nonfiction about your days over there. I saw in one of your stories, Berlin Wall, that you'd worked for NPR at that time.
Yes. I was worked for a news program called Marketplace. In fact, I think it's still on the air. It is still going.
I listen to it on the regular.
Oh, I'll be darned. But I was their startup. I was their very first unit production manager. We had reporters all over the world, and I kind of was responsible to making sure these reporters were paid. I was very important to these reporters because of that.
The most important person.
Yes. Well, evidently, accounts payable from Pacific Public Radio, which is the parent company, they do more than one radio station. We were just their news arm. She comes to me and she goes, we've been trying to pay this reporter behind the Iron Curtain. Back then, the Iron Curtain was still up. This was a long time ago. She says, we've been trying to pay him. We haven't been able to. Every time we send it through the mail and it comes to the Berlin Wall, it stops. The government just stops it cold. We can't pay them. And she goes, he's your reporter. You figure it out. And she just kind of threw the thing on my desk and walked away. And I'm kind of looking at it. And by the way, I'm like 22 years old at the time.
Fresh out of college?
This was my first full-time job in the industry, okay? I served as the intern, but I was just part-time over there. This was my first responsible job. I guess we start at the top. I was on national radio. I was writing the promo for the show, and it went out to 95 stations all across America. And I'm just this little kid, 22 years old. So I'm looking at this thing, and I kind of sit back. And I've always been one of those people that kind of thinks outside the box. I don't do things by route. I always come up with kind of original ways of doing things, which gets me into trouble a lot of times. But
it's great for creativity in writing.
It is. And that's probably why I'm a writer today. So I kind of thought about it. And one of the things I usually do when I'm faced with a problem I'm not sure how to solve is I think, who could solve this for me? Who could I talk to? And just out of the blue, I went, well, there's an ambassador, isn't there, to Poland? This was a Polish reporter. I go, why don't I just call the Polish ambassador in New York? Why not? I did, and they put me right through. I was like,
the United Nations
in New York City, and I got to talk to the Polish ambassador from the UN. He was a wonderful gentleman, too. Got this old world kind of English accent. Sounded like one of my relatives, like an old uncle. And he explained to me, he says, many of my people have the same problem getting paychecks from America. In fact, even my own paycheck used to have trouble. But what I did is I set up a bank account here in the United States with a Polish bank. And the account would be in the Polish bank, too. And we would just do a wire transfer, and it would just completely not be circumvented by the government at all because it's all the same account. He goes, I would be more than happy to set up an account, help your people set up an account. Just have them call my people and we'll do it. And that was it. By the way, he did apologize. He says, the closest I could get the money is to Warsaw, which would be a 100-mile drive for your reporter. Would that be okay? Well, I called the reporter who's been waiting for his paycheck for 6 months and explaining. He goes, yes, just send it. I don't care. I will drive. Just give me my money. So after that, I went to the accounts payable, and it's been 2 hours. Okay. And she's been working on this problem for 6 months, and I explained it to her. And she kind of looks back at me. Her jaw just drops. And she goes, why didn't we think of this? And I was golden with her ever since that day. But that's my experience with the Berlin Wall and how I crossed it. And it was one of the first short stories that I wrote outlining it. And people seemed to like it. So I got some nice positive comments from people that have read it.
Yes, and I ended up finding that story through your website, No Wasted Link.
No Wasted Ink.
Ink.
Yes,
excuse me.
That's all right.
you have linked to a bunch of different things that you've done before to publishers that have published stories such as that, as well as sci-fi haiku.
Yes, it's called Scifaiku. I kind of stumbled into this about, I'd say 3 years ago? Maybe 2 years ago. I was attending Condor, which is a science fiction convention that happens annually in San Diego. And I'm in the art show, and so I put my jewelry into the art show, and I was just sort of sitting back in the courtyard, and I happened to glance at a sign, and it said, Scifaiku workshop, starting in like 5 minutes. And I thought, I'm kind of bored. I got nothing better to do. Why don't I go in? At least there might be air conditioning. So I did. And there was the instructor. She was the president of the Science Fiction Poetry Association, which I highly recommend joining, by the way, if you're a poet. And there were like 4 or 5 other people that I assumed were students. So I sat down and I waited, and nobody else came in. And so the instructor decided to start a presentation. She says, hello, I'm such and such. And she goes, these other people here are not really here to take the class. They're my friends. They're all publishers of magazines of Scifaiku poetry. Every one of them. National ones. and she goes, oh, who are you? And I introduced myself. She goes, well, you're my only student for the day. And I went, oh.
Talk about personal attention.
Yes. So she went through the process, taught me how to brainstorm ideas, because I'd never written a poem since high school, honestly. It is a class assignment, never bothered since. But she walked through steps on how to brainstorm what elements were needed to write a science fiction haiku, a little bit about the history. And believe it or not, Scifaiku has been around for about 20, 30 years. And there is a rather large writing community of poets that write it. But I'd never heard of it before, and when I go out, people go, you're making that up. What do you mean science fiction? Yes, it does exist. But anyway, at the end, she says, now as the class assignment, let's write a poem. And I kind of was sweating. I'm going, I haven't written a poem since high school. So
Nonetheless, a specific kind of poem.
Yeah. I hardly know a haiku from a tonka.
Yes, and for those who don't know, that is 5-7-5 in English, 3 lines. The first line is 5 syllables, second line 7 syllables, third line 5 syllables.
Well, that's haiku. Scifaiku, we kind of throw those out the window. You want to make it short, but you don't necessarily need to have the syllable structure. That rigid structure, yeah. Yeah, science fiction has a lot of technical terms, and we want to allow that. So you can go a little longer, a little shorter, but you try to aim for those syllables if you can make it.
Sure.
And I won't go into the details of that. But anyway, the end product was, I did the poem, I recited it in front of all these magazine editors, and one of them went, wow, I really like that. I'd love to publish it in my magazine. So I went, wow, this is actually interesting. This was a sale. And I'm just sitting here. And I thought, I ought to maybe give this a try. And it took
a few of them, yeah.
And now I've been steadily publishing them for about a year and a half. And I'm thinking about putting together a chapbook of them. So, and if you go to my website, you'll see my illustrated Scifaiku poetry. And I publish them like every other Friday. If I have time to do the sketches, once in a while I don't. So we just toot along, as we do as bloggers.
And we happen to have access to some of them right now. I don't know if you would like me to read some, or if you would like to read it.
No, you can if you'd like.
So the first one up here on your website, nowastedink.com, we have Exoskeleton, which reads, Mechanical Actuators Network. Printed cradle supports my form. Dawn on hypergravity world.
Yep.
So what is the process of going from concept to poem?
Okay, well, how I usually develop Scifaiku, and I usually will develop 4 at a time, and I send them out to magazines in blocks of 4. The magazine that normally publishes my poetry is called Far Horizons, and they like to have enough to basically fill up a page, so to speak. And so they have a nice graphic and everything. If I only sent 1, it'd be a little more difficult. But anyway, the process starts by my basically going through the internet. I do surfing and I look for scientific breakthroughs and concepts. This particular one was based off a couple of articles I was reading about biology and technology that is helping to print things to go into our bodies.
3D printers.
3D printers, yes. And they have things like heart valves. So I did one about a heart valve. They're printing bones. And I think this one was an exoskeleton to basically help handicapped people stand up and walk. Where, if they've been in a wheelchair all their lives, it doesn't matter. They could stand up and they can walk with this kind of stuff, which I found was kind of very interesting. But it also harkens back to, say, like Heinlein's writings during his Starship Troopers and how they were all in those exoskeleton kind of things, and that's kind of what inspired my illustration.
Yes,
for
mech
that one.
gear.
Mech gear, yeah. Interesting story about that too, but maybe another time. But anyway, that was kind of my thought process, and I used some of the terms that the scientists that were describing it in it, like the actuators and how they network and all that kind of thing. And I just popped it into the poem. It just kind of comes to me at that point. But with Scifaiku, you want to always have a time. Now, traditionally, haiku, they do a season. Spring,
Relates
summer,
to the environment.
moon, whatever.
Yeah.
But with sci-fi, you don't always have that. Sometimes you're in the deadness of space.
Who knows if we'll have a season?
Yeah, you might be time traveling. You might be, yeah. But I always try to do a kind of a time. Day, night, morning, something to kind of
frame of
place
reference.
One thing about Scifaiku is you're really writing about a single moment in time. And you're a human emotional response to that. And so I always try to work that into my poems whenever possible.
And with regular haikus, they discourage metaphors and other literary devices in there, and just want to have a description, something, a noun that's supposed to last an image, and you're supposed to try to make it through the form last as long as possible, and then have some deeper meaning attached to that as well. And that is the same for Scifaiku?
Essentially, yeah. It really is kind of the bastard child of haiku. But, some famous authors have used it. David Brin uses Scifaiku as the basis of his Trinity language for his dolphins. And it's all through his uplift novels. I think Joe Haldeman did a little bit of Scifaiku and a few others. You'll find it sprinkled throughout a lot of the professional sci-fi writers. So, like I said, it's not a new thing. It's been around for a while, but it's not really as well known. And I sometimes wonder if I've been as successful as I have with it, just simply because there's not a lot of writers of it. I mean, I've had a professional magazine actually send me free copies saying, please read the magazine and please submit to me. And how often does that happen from a pro magazine? Okay?
Right.
It doesn't. But, and I also like to urge people to write poetry. A friend of mine who has published many novels, and she's actually well known as a poet. In fact, I think she just had a poem in Analog recently. We just happened to be talking. She also is a jeweler like myself. And we were talking at one of our art shows. And she goes, Wendy, you really need to be publishing poetry. And this is before I even, got started. And she goes, it puts your name out as an author, and it gives you a lot more exposure. And they're so small, you can bang out a number of them and just have plenty of stuff to submit. And I thought, wow, that's actually a good idea. So that's kind of what gave me the start of writing Scifaiku. And sure enough, I think she was right. Like
an extreme version of short stories as opposed to novels. You can bang out more of them, get more exposure, and your name out there in different places.
Yeah, I think so. But it's, short stories, even if they're very short, like a flash fiction, I do have a bunch of flash fiction in the pipeline right now. They do take a lot of time. Just as much time as a longer short story, really. So for me, the poetry was a very short form. I can do groups of 4 and get them out, and eventually I'll have a chapbook too to take with me to signings and whatnot.
And on your website, you will also do reviews, author interviews. How do you decide what you're putting on your site I gather the purpose of it is to attract traffic and attention.
Well, my purpose is to attract readers of science fiction and fantasy. Now, granted, my first book is a Regency romance, and I actually have 4 of those planned, but that's it. I'm actually a science fiction fantasy author. That's all I've read growing up. I'm very well versed in it. I go to all the sci-fi conventions. Trust me, I am a science fiction fan. I have to keep saying this because I'm kind of known as an Austen author right now, but no, I am a science fiction fantasy author.
We're trying to pigeonhole you.
Well, I love Austen, and the story that came to me, it was while I was working on my big steampunk series. It was just sort of something to do to kind of take a break, but it all came together so easily I published it first. And that's why this is happening. And I do have 3 more stories. They're already rough drafted. I'm just in the process of revising the sequels. But I only have 4 planned. That will be it. And after that, I have many science fiction and fantasy books in the works. So I'll eventually make that segue. But getting back to the blog, what I do is I do book reviews of classic science fiction and fantasy. I do not review new books. I really don't have the time to read them. I wish I did. But the time that I do have to read, I'd like to read something that gives me pleasure. Read the latest, whatever that catches my eye, read books of my friends, but I don't necessarily only want to be reviewing my friends' books.
That's awkward.
Yeah, it's a little biased. Occasionally, if I like one, I will, but I mean, I don't. But when I'm reviewing are Hugo Award winners, books that I read maybe when I was growing up that have stuck with me for many, many, down through the decades. And I figure if it's done that, there's got to be something good about it.
Old stuff like Philip K. Dick and Isaac Asimov?
Yes, those kind of books. I try to not review the popular authors too often. If like for instance, I'm a big fan of Robert Heinlein. But I'm not going to review all his books ad nauseum because I know not everybody is a Heinlein fan. But I do one maybe once a year or every other year. I've done Starship Troopers and Time Enough for Love. And I think I have another one I'm going to be doing sometime in this coming year. But I've done, almost all of them. Oh, and I also like to review female science fiction authors. Science fiction has been a male-dominated genre since its inception. I mean, women have had a horrible time getting in. And, if you look at the Hugo Award-winning list or the Nebula Award-winning list, there's only a handful of women that have won that award through the decades. And all the other ones are white males, pretty much without exception. And this needs to change. Actually, I belong to a guild of female science fiction writers called Broad Universe. We all band together and we do readings at the sci-fi conventions, and we support each other with networking. But our goal is to promote female writers of science fiction and fantasy and getting us the recognition equal to men. And, people go, in this day and age it doesn't happen. It does. People have done tests. Like, for instance, one woman submitted her manuscript with her female name and would get, your writing is lyrical and pretty, but we don't really want it. It's so cute. Well, she submitted the same manuscript with a male name, and suddenly, you're gutsy writing. We love it. Send more. And I guess she said she sent out like 100 of them with her female name, and there was like maybe 20% positive back. She sent out with the male name. It was like 50 to 60% positive back. So this stuff still is happening, and of course people of color or other, they're kind of getting the shaft too.
Yeah, that's why people will use those pseudonyms or just initials.
Well, yeah, I've noticed a lot of women are just using their initials. Frankly, I'm not going to do that. I am Wendy Van Camp, and that's my name. I'm proud of my work. My name is going on my work. And if you can't handle a female name on the work, that's your problem.
You'll miss out on a great book.
That's right. And I don't know. I guess it's because I've always worked in male-dominated fields where I'm usually the only woman on staff. I'm the token female. And so I'm used to just busting through this stuff and planting my feet and not moving. And, eventually I make my way through. And if I got to do it with my writing, I will.
Quickly going off topic into other fields, you're a gemologist?
Oh, yeah, I am a certified gemologist as well. I go to sci-fi conventions. I used to book a table, which was more profitable. But now, of course, that I'm an author, I book the art show, and I put my jewelry in there. It usually pays for my trip out. And,
that's nice.
Oh, yeah. And then I book time in, like, Author Alley, and then I sell my books, too. So between the two, I'm usually covered.
That's a good place to be, Author's Alley.
I like Author's Alley. Not every convention has one, but last year at Worldcon, I did very well. I was really surprised, and my skills at working at art shows really came into effect. I think I was like the highest selling author on the shifts that I was there, and the other authors were kind of looking at me going, what the heck is she doing? Why is she getting all those sales?
And what were you doing?
Well, I know how to approach people and how not to approach people. There's something called positioning of the foot that as a person you have to look for. If a person comes to your table and their feet are pointed at you, that means they're interested and you can talk to them, and maybe more verbosely than others. But if they come to your table and they're looking at your stuff, but their feet are pointed in a different direction,
they're ready to leave.
That means you don't bother them. You just say something polite, but leave them alone. They may come back. You never know. And sometimes they do. I also know how to set up displays to be enticing. For instance, with my book, I just don't put up my books. I actually have a nice big sign of my book cover up on the table that can be seen from across the room. And sure enough, people were coming from across the room to look because they could see it. Well, the other authors weren't doing anything like that. They had their books up maybe on an easel, or laid out on the table where nobody could see it. But yeah, so I mean, I've used my skills as a jeweler.
Find the right kind of flame to attract the moths.
Yeah, and I'm not doing anything fancy. I don't have a big sign behind me, although I probably should. Eventually, I'll get there. But yeah, I just enough that it's small enough of a kit that I can just pop it into a magazine box along with whatever books I'm taking. And I'm very portable. I can wheel my little luggage cart anywhere with it.
To grow yourself and your name, you're doing the conventions, you're doing the blog, and you recommend other authors to do the same, have a blog, go to conventions? It's
called Building an Author Platform. And in fact, I do a lecture on Author Platform as well, with our Coffee House Writers Group, actually. In fact, I'm even doing a little workshop on writing Scifaiku coming up, too. But anyway, getting back to platform, I think as an author, you can't just publish a book, even traditionally or self-publishing, either way. You can't just finish a book, pop it up on Amazon, and expect to get sales. It does not work that way. You will be very disappointed. If you're lucky, you maybe sell 3 or 4 books. And I've heard many authors complaining, oh, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Oh, why is nobody buying my book? I thought it would be more successful. Well, it might be a good book. I don't know. I mean, I assume if you've sweated into it for a couple of years, you've done your best effort, that you've gone ahead and you've had it edited, and that you've gone to critique groups and gotten input, and that it's been positive enough that you feel that this is something you could put out into the world.
Something as polish.
Yes. So if, granted, you've done all that and you're still not getting sales, the problem is not your book. Your problem is Author Platform. What I did is, even before I published a short story, I started my blog. And the people in my writing groups are going, why are you doing this? What a waste of time. Oh my. And they'd whine and complain and laugh at me. But, I've been a working artist for many years, and I know that marketing is key to developing a successful business. And writing books is a business. A book, even though it's a labor of love and something that we enjoy doing, it's also a product, and it's something that you have to learn how to sell. If people don't know who you are as an author, if they don't know what your books are, if they haven't seen your book or a ad about your book at least 7 or 8 times, they're likely not to buy it. So you need to start setting yourself up to get in front of their faces. So I started No Wasted Ink, and I just I do a range of things that I hope will attract readers of science fiction and fantasy, because again, I am a science fiction and fantasy author, not an Austen author.
If you haven't gotten that clear by now.
No, it's okay. And seriously, I do love Austen. I really do. She'll always be a favorite.
Hey, if you had done science fiction, fantasy first, they would maybe not take your Austen stuff seriously.
You know, that's true. That's true. And I'd liked both series to sell. But anyway, getting back to...
Yes, the platform.
Yes, the platform. But anyway, I started my blog maybe at least 1.5 years before I even published a short story. And it was almost 2 years before I put out my first book. But in my first year at the blog, I had very little traffic. I mean, you know, you don't just come out like Athena fully formed at the forehead. You have to start small and build your way up. I wasn't sure what my blog was going to be about. I experimented with different things, little articles, whatever, and I wasn't consistent at first because I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. But a friend of mine who is a pro blogger, who actually pays her mortgage with her blog.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cindy is good. In fact, she's the one that was urging me to get back into writing. You know, I even had Lark Books offer me a $2,000 advance on a book, and I was still so blocked I couldn't take it. Now, granted, Mattel did offer me a $10,000 contract on the same day, so I did take the directing job, but that's another story. But yeah, I took her advice. Oh, and by the way, I believe it's called, is it Bead Arts? Or anyway, want to give her a plug. She's such a nice lady. But Cindy told me, you know, Wendy, you have to be consistent. You have to plug into what your audience wants to read. Don't be too personal on it. They're not there to learn about you. They want to learn about the jewelry that I'm doing or the events that relate to them. And she also told me, make sure you schedule certain types of posts on certain days of the week. And so I thought about that and I went, So I developed a formula and I follow that formula today. What I do is every Monday I publish links to articles about writing that I like. Now, these are articles that personally interest me. They have to be articles that I feel are weighty enough to be worth the effort for people to read. So I will not I very, very seldom link to something that's 500 words or less. It has to be at least 750 or longer, so almost like a white page. And it has to be a topic that interests me as an author, or interests me as somebody into fountain pens. I do a little bit of those things too. Well, it's writing or handwriting. I do sometimes link to things about women in science fiction and about how women authors maybe are a little bit discouraged and what's being done about it. So a little political in that way, but I don't go political otherwise.
I think we should be at least noted that the person credited as being the mother of science fiction wrote Frankenstein.
Yes.
The very first one was a woman.
Yes, Mary Shelley.
Mary Shelley.
Yes, she created our genre. Imagine that. So, yeah.
The other types of posts.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. In fact, her image is on our Broad Universe badge. We honor her. But anyway, Mondays I always do the links to articles. And it's really, I would say, one of my most popular posts. People really do come in. I see probably a tripling of my traffic every Monday for people wanting to come. And it's usually reblogged by several people every single week. Oh, and by the way, I only post Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Now, occasionally I might do an announcement on another day, but those are the 3 days that I post. And I don't do any more because, like I like to tell my fellow authors, we're here to write books. We're here to write short stories. We don't necessarily make a lot of money off our blogs. So even though the blog is important for building your author platform, having time to work on your projects should always be your first priority. So you need to limit the amount of time that you're publishing. You shouldn't be doing this A to Z kind of thing where you're publishing every single day, you're pulling your hair out because you want to get something out every single day, and then you stop. Well, no, that is the wrong way to do blogging. You should set up a schedule, and honestly, I think you could get away with doing once a week or twice a week. You don't have to go 3 times a week like I do. Sometimes I wish I had started with only twice a week, because now I'm getting so busy, it's sometimes hard to keep up with the blog. But yeah, the key is being consistent, and having topics that interest your readers, not necessarily fellow writers, but readers. So Monday is more of a writerly kind of thing. I do my links that I give out to are to articles about writing. So my fellow writers are very happy with that. Now, Wednesday, we kind of shift gears. I alternate my Wednesdays. One week, I will do a book review of a classic science fiction or fantasy novel. Again, I do not review new books, and sorry to those of you that submit them to me, but I don't have the time, and I apologize, but I have to think of my own books and my writing time. I need to have time to write.
It's quicker to go through the old books?
Well, I've already read them, and what I do is I read the wiki to kind of refresh my memory about the details, make sure that my names are correct, that kind of thing. But they are all legitimately books I have read in the past that I enjoyed. I don't review books that I hated. I don't want to waste the time. If I like the book, I will tell you why I like the book, and I will give you enough information about the book and the author so that you can make your own judgment about it. And people do seem to like my book reviews. And in fact, they're being reprinted in magazines all over the place. So not only do I have a blog post for my blog, and in my book review case, they always publish there first, but I reprint them. And again, going back to the poetry, how it puts your name out there, the book reviews are also putting my name out there. I have a regular column on a magazine called Lunar Station Quarterly that publishes one of my book reviews every month. And I have a science fiction fantasy newsletter it's relatively small, but it's a nice little group. I enjoy belonging to it. And they will usually reprint one of my book reviews once a month. And I'm always looking for other opportunities to farm those out because they're well written. They're about 1,000 words long, and I do go into depth, and they generally seem to be accepted, so that's a good thing. My other Wednesday is with new books. What I do is author interviews, and again, we do science fiction fantasy authors. And what I do is I have a standard interview. I ask everybody pretty much the same questions. Now, if an author doesn't want to answer one, as long as it's not the introduction to them, I say just skip it and don't worry about it. And what I do is I just go through their writing process. How do they develop their title, cover, that kind of thing. And everybody always has a slightly different answer, and it's actually been a very popular thing too. And of course, at the bottom, I always give full linkage not only to their books, but I like to link to their cover artists and to their publishers too. And evidently, the traffic is going to those people. So I like to support our wonderful book cover artists out there too, because I don't think they get enough recognition.
Does the traffic not take you as seriously before you were published all of these short stories? Because you said you started it before you had all this going, or did it go maybe up once you were publishing regularly?
I think it went up since I published my first book. My first year, of course, was very low. I mean, I was lucky to get maybe a couple hundred hits a month. Now, of course, it's considerably, several thousand hits a month. And more sometimes, depending on the time of year. It's just grown, and I think as I get out to conventions and more people know me, I do know I get subscribers to my blog every single day. So, and once they're a subscriber, they don't necessarily come back to view the blog, but they're reading it in their email. And I think I'm around, 1,600 at this point, just through WordPress. But I have a lot more through other avenues, because I've checked on Feedly and I have a lot of people there. And so adding up, it's a considerable number. And that doesn't even count Twitter and all the other stuff that I do.
Sure. And I'm looking at it now. It's almost 26,000.
Is it really?
It really is.
Wow.
Joined 25,954 other followers.
Well, actually, that's in combination with Twitter and Facebook, too.
Okay.
So it's not all just the blog. The blog is really just one leg of my online platform. A platform should have other legs, too, and that would include Facebook, it would include Twitter, Google+, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and these are just ones off the top of my head. There's a lot more. A lot of people like Instagram. I haven't done Instagram yet, but I probably will get there eventually. I don't take a lot of photos. Strangely enough,
here's pictures of words.
Well, yeah, it's funny because here I come from a background being a filmmaker, and I used to tell my story. I mean, my series, Musician Discoveries, and then in my other series, Coffee House Poetry, it was all just images with the moving cameras. And now here I am. I'm lucky if I take a photo a year or something. I'm trying to train myself out of that.
We have cameras in our pockets now.
I know, and I keep reminding myself I could even do video with the phone camera.
On Instagram, we'll let you do, I think it's 10-second videos.
I know. It's just, I guess, I have old standards with broadcast quality work. And sometimes when I see what goes on the air, it makes me cringe. I really, if I'm going to do something, I want it done right. But then that means it puts it off. And I shouldn't be doing that. I should follow my own advice and just do it. But, sometimes we have so many plates up in the air. If you add one more, they're all going to crash down on your head. So what can I say?
I see a lot of blogs by writers for writers. Yours is more geared towards the science fiction fans. Do you ever get afraid that you're attracting the wrong audience, of attracting too many writers, people that are interested in that, and not necessarily for the product that you have to sell and your fiction and
I used to wonder about that. And because, the old adage out on the art scene, if you go to a show, you're a jeweler, and you go to a show of all jewelers, well, not as many people are going to buy your jewelry because there's so many other people there. But I think with writing, it's actually a little different. Every product is different, right? Writers generally are readers. And I know as an author myself, I do buy books. I just went to a writers conference this past weekend, and I went to a poetry panel, and I really enjoyed it. One was a chapbook called Monster Verse. And it was an anthology of horror, HORROR, poems. I have to specify that on the radio. It was very similar to my Scifaiku, and so I really liked it, and I bought a book. And another of the poets had her own chapbook and read from it, and her poetry, again, was close enough to my Scifaiku that I really got into it because it was a science fiction themed poetry, but she did long poems. And I just liked her work so much, I bought one of hers too. So, just as that example, as a writer of poetry, I do buy poetry books. As a writer of science fiction and fantasy, I also buy many science fiction and fantasy books. The last book I read that I really enjoyed was The Martian. And I love the story that Andy Weir is just starting out, putting his story on his blog and then building on up, and eventually got a movie deal with his first book. Wouldn't that be nice that it happened to all of us? But the book was genuinely good, and it harkened back to the classic golden age of science fiction, of hard science fiction. The story was more about the science of living on the planet, and the planet was the antagonist against his hero trying to just survive and get back home. And so it touched on a universal theme of people banding together to save somebody, and the emotions involved in that, and, coming back to our family, juxtapositioned with this, dealing with this alien environment that, is something that we're probably going to be dealing with in the next 20 years. There will be people living there before much longer. I often say they just have to find some kind of rare element on Mars, and you will not be able to stop people from going.
Unobtainium.
It's something like that. You don't know. But I mean, any mineral, and honestly, there's companies out there drooling over the asteroid belt right now. There's entire rocks of palladium and other minerals that would make billions of dollars here on Earth if we got it here.
Rare earth elements that
Absolutely.
go in our technology, our iPods, our computers, laptops.
Absolutely, and it's up there just waiting for somebody, like the California gold rush. If you find it, we'll come. So I honestly think that we'll be doing this kind of thing within the next 20 years. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't be. There's just too much money to be made, to be honest. But anyway, The Martian kind of harkens back to that. And classic science fiction, there's often a lot of speculation. Did science fiction stories inspire our society? Did it build what we are today? Or was it a prediction? I honestly think it built us. I think the scientists and the geeks looked at what was being written about from the imaginations of science fiction authors and went, darn, that's a darn good idea. I want to build that. And sure enough, they do.
I'm inclined to agree, if for no other reason, but we have inventors in our own time who will specifically tell you, Star Trek inspired this invention that I made.
Absolutely. Star Trek is a biggie. I'm sure Star Wars is kind of going along the same way. Believe it or not, going back to Robert Heinlein, how I mentioned that this is related to that story. Heinlein, of course, had the big mech soldiers and how they did that. Well, did you know Starship Troopers is actually part of the curriculum in West Point? And
I did not know that.
Yeah, I don't believe it's required reading, but it's listed as one of their optional readings for the young soldiers. There's been rumors that generals will call them and says, I've been reading through Robert Heinlein, and he has all these mechanized things. Why don't we have that? You look at right now. And they did. And a lot of and if you remember too, we have an all-volunteer army now. Starship Troopers was that as well. But what you may not remember is, at the time that it was being written, all our armies were conscript at that time. They were not volunteer. And so the way that it was structured is kind of based on how we structure things now, too. So again, it was art inspiring the future.
Other science fiction that I think is a worthy military strategy read, Ender's Game, because that thing's full of strategy.
Absolutely.
And ways of thinking about your enemy and spatial. I mean, we may come to hopefully not fighting alien bugs, but...
Yes. Well, I thought the movie captured that element quite well. When the young students, the cadets, were being trained for battle in the 3D environment, learning not to think just horizontally, but, in all directions. I rather enjoyed that kind of aspect. I don't know if the movie was the greatest movie since sliced bread, even if it did have my favorite Harrison Ford in it. But I did like that element, and I thought that was a nice capture to show how battle in space would be very different than what we view battle today here on Earth.
I thought it was a very worthy movie. Having read the book and seen the movie, I enjoyed it quite thoroughly. For the blog in attracting more attention towards science fiction, how do you do that? We've gone over the Scifaikus. Mm-hmm. Is it just the books that you read and the authors that you interview, or is there something else, some sort of mystique that's attracting people to you?
I don't know. I do articles too, and I do a lot of articles about writing and promoting your book as a writer. That's my Friday post, by the way. I used to write an article every Friday, and now I've opened up every alternate Friday to a guest blogger. Or no, actually I do a guest blogger once a month, and I do an article on Friday. So I do 2 articles Fridays, and then I do 2 Scifaikus that I post. Generally, we write about, we try to keep things a little bit in the sci-fi thing, but occasionally I will just do a straight writing post on that. Or I'll do a travel log kind of thing about events that I've been to. So it kind of brings a little bit of a personal touch into the blog. But yeah, I think it's a mistake to write only about the craft of writing and only about marketing your writing, because that does interest fellow authors. And yes, fellow authors do write books, but I wanted to get away from that. So my earlier posts in my blog, probably for the first 2 years at least, were almost always about writing and the writing process. But since that point, I've been pulling away from it. I still do the writing posts because they are of interest to people. But I try to do a little bit more about viewing things from a fan point of view, from a reader's point of view, and what I try to find. And one thing about writing all the book reviews that I've done is I've been able to research a lot of the past history of authors. Like, for instance, Flowers for Algernon, very famous science fiction book from the 1960s. Did you know the author also was one of the original Marvel comic authors too?
What was his name?
Oh my gosh! Now I'm spacing out on his name, but yeah, the author of Flowers for Algernon worked with Stan Lee. Who knew?
Was it? It wasn't Jack Kirby, was it?
No. It's somebody else.
Okay.
But yeah, he's had a couple of things published there, and I was like flabbergasted. Oh my gosh! And it's amazing how they were all interconnected. Who knew who and whatever, and then you look back through their work and you see a lot of the influences. So I have to say the blog has been really good for me in learning my genre, learning the history of my genre, understanding the tropes of fantasy and science fiction, seeing who's winning and why for the Hugo Awards, because that's kind of a personal dream of mine. Hopefully one day, we'll see. But it's a matter of I don't know. I guess it's just helping me become a better writer in general.
Is it sort of a if you build it, they will come sort of thing? What else do you have to do than just have the blog?
Well, you have to be interconnected, and you can't have all your eggs in one basket. You should not rely on social media to get the word out. Personal appearances are very important too. I think I've made better progress by going onto the science fiction circuit, into book fairs and meeting people one-on-one, making that sale one at a time to make a more lasting impression with readers. With social media, it's really hit and miss. I mean, I have 24,000 people following me on Twitter, but they don't necessarily see my tweets every time. I mean, only a small fraction will at any given time. So I just keep hitting it and hitting it. I have done some experimentation with that. I was curious if I was really getting sales from Twitter, even though I do have a high number. Are they really reading? So I did an experiment where I ran ads for my book, The Curate's Brother, and I would do one tweet a day for 2 weeks to 3 weeks. And then I would go for a month without doing anything. And then I would check my sales. And sure enough, when I was doing my regular tweets on my feed, I was getting more sales. And then when I stopped doing that, my sales plummeted down to, just very, very small. So
Wow.
It actually was working for me. But if you only have a few hundred followers, because again, I talk to other authors and they go, well, I have 500 followers on Twitter and it's not doing anything for me. Well, that's because you don't have enough followers yet. I talked to a wonderful author who kind of helped me decide what numbers I needed to shoot for my author platform by the name of Darlene Quinn. She's not a science fiction author. She's a local author here in the Orange County area. And she does quite well. She has bestsellers. But I went up to her and I said, Darlene, how many followers do I need to have? I think at this time I only had a few hundred followers on Twitter. And she says, well, just at a baseline, you won't see anything until you have 10,000 followers. And my jaw dropped. I went, oh my God, that many? And I go, what about Facebook? She goes, oh, at least 500. And what about your blog? She goes, oh, don't even bother publishing until you have at least 500 followers on your blog. And at the time, I was very, very under those numbers. And so, but instead of letting this discourage me, I went, okay, if that's what I have to do, I'm going to do it. And I worked my butt off until I reached those numbers. And I did not launch The Curate's Brother until I had those numbers. And when I launched my book, it is profitable. My very first book, out the gate, has made money. And granted, I'm not a bestseller. It's not enough to pay my rent. But the fact that I didn't lose any money on the project makes me very proud. I think that was a very successful first launch, and I'm hoping for better with my future books.
What do you say to a writer who is in the mindset of, well, that's why I have a publisher, they'll sell my book for me?
No, they're not going to sell your book for you. I'm sorry. I mean, unless you are already a bestseller, a traditional publisher will not do anything for you. They might take a chance on you, but they're not going to do any real publicity other than the very, very bare basics. And more than likely, the most money you'll get from them is whatever advance, if they even give you an advance for. You need to self-publish first, and you need to establish that you have a platform, that you do have followers. You need to sell your book yourself and show that you do have a sales volume. And then eventually the publishers will come sniffing at your heels, and hopefully they'll give you an offer you can't refuse. Now, I think once you hit that point, you come to a decision. Am I good enough to keep marketing my books successfully so I don't have to give up maybe half of my profits to get a publisher, or can I just keep going alone? And the answer to that seems to be these days that authors are going alone. You'll find many former traditionally published authors are waiting with bated breath until their books clear that they can take them back to themselves and do their own marketing. And when they have future books, they don't even bother. They're slowly pulling away from the traditional publishers. And that's why the Big Six is now the Big Five. And I think that trend is going to continue unless the publishers wake up and realize they got to start doing a little bit more for their money than say, oh, here I am, I'm a publisher. Well, that and a dime is going to get you a cup of coffee.
Yeah,
okay?
I mean, if I could sell my own book and get the same numbers without the publisher, then I'll do that.
Absolutely. I mean, if I sell my book on Amazon, I'm getting 70% of the profits. If I'm selling via a traditionally published venue, I would get maybe 10%, something like that. So do I, my book isn't expensive, okay? Online, it's $2.99. But of that $2.99, I'm making about $2 a book, which doesn't sound like a lot, but as the volume continues, it adds up. If the same book was by a traditional publisher, I'd maybe get 8 cents a book. So you can do the math, and I have done the math, and I am very happy to be a self-published author.
Very great. Well, thank you very much for coming. Is there anything else you'd like to put out there before we wrap up?
Not really. I've just that I've enjoyed being here. I hope all of you will continue to return to the Coffee House Writers Group podcast and help this fine gentleman with his work. And it's really been a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. We really love doing this. We get a lot of great conversations like that. And we would love to have some feedback from the community. Please like, comment, subscribe on whichever platform you are viewing this at. Please share it around. Please make sure that other people see it, because we have a lot of good stuff and things to share. We are at CHWRitersGroup.org. We have our meetups, our Facebook group, facebook.com/coffeehousewritersgroup. Our Twitter handle is @CHWritersGroup. We just really love involvement here, so go forth and create.